At this point, I'm going to introduce you to Max Light-Pacheco. He is with the Nature Conservancy, and he's going to be talking to us today about bridging bytes and blooms, and that is with the City Nature Challenge.
Thank you so much, Becky. My name is Max Light-Pacheco. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm the Volunteer and Community Engagement Program Specialist with the Nature Conservancy. I've been with the organization for 2 years at this point. And I'm going to be talking about a program that is very special to me, the City Nature Challenge, and talking about why community conservation is so important. So my presentation, I called it Bridging Bytes and Blooms, Embracing Nature Through the Tech in the City Nature Challenge. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and why I care about this sort of work. I was born and grew up in Los Angeles, California, in West LA, one of the most urban areas. However, even though it was one of the most urban areas on the planet, I still loved finding nature around me. I lived near a giant park called Cheviot Hills and used to love going with my mom and family to spend time out in nature, whether it be in the park, playing on the grass, or observing nature in my own home. I grew up loving Jeff Corwin and Steve Irwin and the Kratt brothers and spending a huge amount of time learning about animals. That led me to decide to go to UC Davis for school. And when I went to UC Davis, that is when I ended up finding out about the iNaturalist app. I downloaded it in on December 22nd of 2015, and now 845 observations of 374 species in 7 different countries later. I can say that I am a huge fan of this app, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what iNaturalist is. And I love the City Nature Challenge being able to promote this app and promote nature. I view the City Nature Challenge and iNaturalist as a way to form a more equitable version of the naturalist experience. For a long time, access to information about nature was more limited and was only accessible to people who had resources to spend time actually learning about different animals and plants and how to identify them. Now with iNaturalist and being able to participate in the City Nature Challenge, there is a place where people are able to go and be able to identify plants, animals, and fungi within their communities or wherever they happen to be and learn more about them. Because I think it's so important that we're able to learn more about the different creatures that are around us. I also think it helps us think about the different details in life, as well as gain a greater appreciation for conservation and nature in general. I also love using iNaturalist specifically for memory collection. Some of these photos are from my travels, and I love being able to go back and look at some of the different cool species that I've seen around the world, whether it be ibex, grebe, or turnstone, and think about the importance nature has played in my life. So community science. So you're going to be hearing me mention the term community science quite a bit. So what exactly is community science? It's also known as citizen science, and we'll talk a little bit about the difference between the two. But it's the practice of public participation and collaboration in science research to identify and increase scientific knowledge. Citizen science or community science is not a new study. The existence of this kind of work has been around for thousands of years, whether it be in Japan, people going and monitoring the blooms of cherry blossoms to determine when blooming patterns were occurring, to people going out and collecting different specimens in Europe. However, citizen science has really grown pretty significantly in recent years, in large part due to increased interest in conservation and concerns over impacts of climate and biodiversity loss. So the term citizen science, there's a lot of effort about changing that more to community science because the term citizen can be pretty limiting because you don't necessarily have to be a citizen of a region to participate. However, people who use the term still oftentimes argue that for a lot of funding efforts, it is important to use the term citizen. So if you're going to go through certain funding mechanisms, say federal government, but also that we are all global citizens and we're all participating, and they view community science oftentimes as focusing really on the specific community living in, whereas something that's larger scale, as citizens of the earth, we're all participating. Citizen science is really important for many reasons. It is important to offer opportunities to involve people in learning about nature and conservation. It comes in various forms. So there is citizen science that is focused more on a tech basis, and then there's stuff that's more in the field. It's an opportunity to bring people in. So citizen science can be, or community science can be science that is more accessible for an everyday individual, people who are not necessarily working in this field. It doesn't have to take a huge amount of time. You could even spend 5 to 10 minutes on it. But all the effort of yourself as well as other people comes together and offers the opportunity to collect big data sets. Data sets that oftentimes scientists are not able to collect on their own. It's also a really important way to provide stakeholders an opportunity to learn more about conservation needs in their area. Community science projects focus on biodiversity, aim to advance knowledge in biodiversity, promote education in biodiversity conservation, and increase public involvement and biodiversity-oriented practices at the local scale. It also helps increase knowledge of local nonprofits and other community organizations that are doing critical conservation efforts. This work is especially helpful in urban environments where there are many opportunities to see the impacts of humans on our natural environment. Cities are an area that we oftentimes don't think about when we talk about nature. However, nature is all around us and everywhere. And the urban environment provides us a really helpful interface to see how we are impacting the species around us. Okay. So what is this? What is the City Nature Challenge? So the City Nature Challenge is what is now an international event that started in 2016, where people go out and lead bio blitzes or other events to identify the different life around them, whether it be fungus, animal, plant, and we're actually doing a really cool project where we're trying to see if we can learn a little bit more about bacteria this year. The goals of the City Nature Challenge are connecting people in urban and metro areas to their local nature. And that goal is actually expanding because they want to offer the opportunity for people who don't necessarily live in what you would call a typical urban or metro area, the opportunity to engage with nature, because nature is everywhere. And we want to engage everybody in conservation. It's also important to connect people to one another and build community. If we don't have strong community, we're not going to be able to meet important conservation goals. This connection doesn't have to necessarily be in person. This can also be online. We're growing increasingly, recognizing the importance of the digital world in order to create connection between individuals, especially individuals who would normally not be able to interact in person, whether due to language differences or location differences. The project also helps collect urban biodiversity data, which is available for use for science, management, and conservation efforts. Oftentimes data that individual scientists or organizations could not have the capacity to collect on their own. By growing this volunteer biodiversity documentation globally, we're offering opportunities for multiple people to engage in conservation action. It's also an incredibly fun event where you're able to have both competition between different cities and communities, as well as collaborate and find mutual connections, whether it be through shared species diversity of different regions or shared interest in terms of conservation goals and expectations. Local leaders are the ones who take charge of the City Nature Challenge in different regions. However, the cities of Los Angeles and San Francisco are where the head organizers live and work out of. The head organizers in those cities provide support and give the tools for local organizers who know their communities to actively lead and be able to take part of the as part of the project in ways that make sense for their communities. And they also make some larger decisions about the program because, as you can imagine, if there is a global program like this, you need a few individuals who are able to make some of the final decisions for some of the bigger elements of the program. So the event is split into two major portions. There is the observation period where observations of different animals and plants that are seen are taken and made. And then there's the identification period where people confirm if the observations made have been properly identified, and if not, providing alternate identifications for those species. So City Nature Challenge is run through the iNaturalist app or website. So what is iNaturalist? iNaturalist is a very cool application, very similar to a hybrid of data management, social media program. It was originally a master's final project by Nathan Agrin, Jessica Klein, and Ken Ichiwita at UC Berkeley School of Information. The master's project was very well received, and Cal Academy of the Sciences in San Francisco and National Geographic Society decided that they would take it on and run with it and make it a larger program and offer the opportunity for people around the world to be able to identify different plants, animals, and fungi and update it. So iNaturalist provides a space to record and organize nature findings, meet other people who are nature enthusiasts of all different types, whether they be hikers, bikers, hunters, runners, birders, and learn about the natural world. It encourages participation of that wide group. And then in 2014, after becoming part of Cal Academy of the Sciences and National Geographic Society expanded in 2017. And in 2023, so very recently, it became its own 501c3 nonprofit. While it still has strong connections with Cal Academy and National Geographic Society, now it is its own nonprofit, which can accept donations and has its own base staff. Internationally, they partner with several different organizations through what is referred to as the iNaturalist network to provide more of a localized experience for different places to give a bigger reach and impact. And then iNaturalist really hopes to create an extensive community awareness of local biodiversity and promote further exploration of local environments. There is another program that was started by the people who created iNaturalist called Seek. Seek is basically iNaturalist for children or those under 13. It does not require internet to use. And while it has location services on the app so that it can help identify what location you're at, it doesn't store that information, unlike iNaturalist. So you don't make identifications in the same way, but it does and doesn't contribute to data collection in the same way. But it offers those who are under 13 an opportunity to do observations out in the wild or out in different species of different plants, animals, and fungi. So what is the origin of the City Nature Challenge? So the City Nature Challenge started in 2016 and was started by the community science staff at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles, Lila Higgins, and Allison Young and Rebecca Johnson at the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco. Both of these organizations had been asked by the Obama administration to create an event for the first Citizen Science Day. And they came up with the City Nature Challenge as a way. The first year was a smaller year, but a huge success. That was originally a competition between Los Angeles and San Francisco. Now, if you know anything about LA and San Francisco, me being from LA, you will know that they have a large rivalry, and they were able to use the City Nature Challenge as a way to use that rivalry for the benefit of conservation action. Um, 1,000 folks participated in the City Nature Challenge that year and made 19,000 observations, which is an incredible number of observations of 2,500 species. And that is where it started. The next year, they decided to expand through the United States to different parts of the states in 16 different cities. And the year after was when they decided to go global. And went global in countries like Italy and Pakistan. From 2018, as you know, 2019 happened, and then 2020, when the pandemic hit, they moved away from the competition model a bit because there was the concern of people interacting, but they still wanted to provide space for people to participate in the City Nature Challenge. Now, this is the only year that the number of actual observations has dropped. However, in other areas, in terms of the number of countries participating, as well as the number of observers and species, those numbers still went up during the pandemic, showing that even during times of stress, it is important for people to be able to connect together and connect in the natural environment. Forward to this year, we're looking at over 500 different cities and communities worldwide participating during the period of April 26th through April 29th. So the city that last year had the best numbers, if you're interested, is La Paz, Bolivia. They had 3,025 people making 126,435 observations of 5,344 species. The people in La Paz, Bolivia have oftentimes been close to the top. In fact, La Paz, Bolivia, Cape Town, South Africa, and Houston, Texas, as well as Dallas have been oftentimes the top cities. Now, I mentioned that I work with the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy is an organization that's been around since 1951, working on protecting the lands and waters on which all life depends. And from very early on in the City Nature Challenge, it's been an important part, or the Nature Conservancy has participated and has played an important role at making observations throughout the United States, as well as in some locations worldwide. Our main effort in the City Nature Challenge is to get people of all experience levels and abilities outdoors. It's an opportunity to build public interest in nature, which can translate to long-term commitment to conservation. In addition, it also helps us with building up of different audiences that we maybe wouldn't normally reach. And by sharing social media outreach with partner organizations as well as materials, it helps us to build stronger bonds for different conservation efforts in the regions that we participate in. It also offers opportunities for co-hosting of different events and cements connections. So a good example is co-hosting with a social justice organization can lead to further partnerships on urban environmental work down the road. Also, collecting research-grade data helps build a knowledge base that can be used by scientists within our organization as well as outside of our organization. So this year we have 11 different states participating in the City Nature Challenge, including the state of Oregon, as well as DC and Hong Kong. TNC, also Nature Conservancy, has participated since 2018 and has oftentimes been a leader. If we take a look at the top 10 observation cities every year, we consistently see Houston, DC, and Dallas in the top 10. These are all cities where the Nature Conservancy has taken a large role in the City Nature Challenge and has spent a lot of time, effort, resources towards putting on the challenge. We've also seen a lot of success in the state of Oregon. We, as the Nature Conservancy, have been participating. We started participation in Eugene, in Lane County, in 2019 to 2020, and really expanded that into the Portland, Vancouver metro area over the past few years. This upcoming year, we're very excited that the state of Oregon has 4 different communities participating in the City Nature Challenge. We have Portland, Vancouver Metro, Bend, Lane County, and of course, Salem. And we're having some element of participation in each of those regions. We'll talk a little bit more about how we're participating in a future slide. And so example of kind of some of the ways that the Nature Conservancy has gained experience. A case study would be the city of Houston. A huge reason that they wanted to engage was because it was an opportunity to engage large numbers of community members, especially community members that have not been reached in their traditional audience. As well as to engage local city decision makers to consider and appreciate the city's natural resources. And it also helps encourage usage and connection to the preserves that we have as part of our portfolio. As a land trust organization, we have many different plots of land throughout the United States that we help conserve. And while the primary aspect is to conserve the natural heritage of those spaces, it is also important for us to be able to connect the communities that live around those preserves with those preserves so they can understand the value of those spaces and keeping them preserved. In the past, we have hosted events in the state of Oregon at a variety of different locations, including Mount Tabor Park and Camassia Natural Area. And we've worked with a variety of different groups, whether they be corporate groups, nonprofits, and even a college, Portland Community College, to put on bio blitzes or observation events of multiple sizes. This year, we're going to be having events at Camassia Natural Area, Willow Creek Preserve down in Eugene, and the Sandy River Gorge. And then TNC chapters participate by spreading word as well on their website. And then leaders in our organization come primarily from Texas, Virginia, Florida, DC, and Oregon. So there is a lot of benefits, and then there's also some potential drawbacks of working in the City Nature Challenge and using tech for scientific work. One of the key factors that we want to consider is that happiness and health are intricately linked to environment. You can find multiple studies of the important impacts of having access to nature has on our mental, physical health, as well as the drawbacks of not having access to nature. This opportunity with the City Nature Challenge is an opportunity to engage people where they're at. In the United States, this day and age, approximately 80% of the US population has a smartphone. And by helping them use their smartphone to identify different plants and animals, we're able to engage a variety of different communities. The City Nature Challenge is very flexible. You don't necessarily even have to leave your house to participate in the City Nature Challenge. There are people who will just stay at home and take pictures of spiders or insects that have crawled into their house. Or weeds that have popped up in their backyard. There's also individuals who like going to big events, and it's a great way to engage people who are looking for social interaction. It's also important because it offers us an opportunity to not only learn more about species, but then also to build empathy. The more we are able to encourage people to learn about the plants and animals and fungi around them, the more likely we're going to build a connection between those people and the natural environment, as well as potentially help with reducing the risk of human-wildlife conflicts in the future. So the City Nature Challenge is an opportunity to record a data gold mine for scientists. Individual scientists could never collect as much information as collected during the City Nature Challenge. And especially as our climate is changing and we're seeing changes in species distribution and seasonality, such as seeing changes in wildflower season, it is more critical to be able to document these changes through the City Nature Challenge, because that data can be useful for scientists to determine how climate is impacting different creatures, whether it be plants going out of sync with pollinators, or different species coming out of hibernation earlier. People are recording what they see and capturing what's happening in wide varieties of areas. Another great example comes from the Melbourne Eastern metropolitan area. In 2021, they contributed 4,638 biodiversity records. And those participants found about 1% of the 2,112 species that were found had not been recently recorded within the last 3 decades, in fact, in that region. So they're finding species that maybe we wouldn't have known were still in an area. They also are finding species that are not normally native to those areas, including they found over 22 species that had been recently introduced to the state of Victoria. That information is really critical because if we know about species being introduced, especially early on, we're able to oftentimes address more proactively impacts of introduced species before they become invasive. And it's always better to get it early on because once a species has become endemic to an area, it's pretty impossible to keep it from having impacts. So it's also a really great way to get people out in nature and get people engaged in environmental education. Kids spend less time outdoors than they ever have. And children these days are spending a huge amount of time watching videos of wildlife and observing animals via their televisions and phone screens rather than in person. This is a great way to encourage them while using their phones to engage in nature and give them a little bit of the best of both worlds and encourage them to get outdoors. Now, the flip side of that is more screen time possibly, but it is important to recognize that we can use these screens for positives. It can be detaching from nature, but it's considering how you're using it, especially when you're using it with children. My suggestion oftentimes with iNaturalist is spend some time taking the photos, but you don't necessarily need to upload everything in the field. And make sure that you take a few moments, and when you're working with a group or a few individuals, make sure you're taking times to pause and survey the area around you. Yes, it's great to make observations, and that's an important part of the City Nature Challenge, but the critical part of the City Nature Challenge is actually getting outside and interfacing with the natural world. So use of our phones is very helpful, but also making sure that you are monitoring the amount of time you're spending on the phone versus actually making, a view of the outer world. So it's really important to make some considerations for privacy. I will say that I think that the iNaturalist app does an incredible job of keeping data protected. But whenever you're using an online system, it's important to consider privacy, both for yourself as well as wildlife. So for wildlife, it's really important because if you capture something like an endangered plant species or animal, the observation, if you have too close of a location, it might be a risk to that animal or plant because of maybe poachers or people who are dealing with human-wildlife conflicts with that particular species. Now, the iNaturalist app does take a lot of that into consideration and will obscure or potentially privatize the location of species that are endangered or at risk of being harmed. But you can also make sure that you change your own geo-privacy of individual observations. So making sure that if you know a species might be a little bit more at risk or might be a species that is unwelcome by many people in your community, say, example, like a coyote, you can keep it and give it a little bit more privacy by putting geo-privacy on that particular observation. You can also set up your own geo-privacy for all of your own observations as well as your account, and can set different privacy settings for the photos and videos that you take on the iNaturalist and upload to the iNaturalist app, so that either they could be used for the general usage and be printed in magazines or whatever have you, or they can't be viewed by anybody but staff on my iNaturalist team. It is also critical to consider data accuracy. With a large system like that, with many different people participating, there is a possibility for a lot of good data, but there's also a possibility for a lot of flawed data. This is not because there are necessarily bad actors trying to purposely put out bad information. However, we all make mistakes. One of the great things about the way iNaturalist is set up is it's set up as a community that helps with identifications. So people are going in and to become a research grade, so an observation that will be actually used by a scientist, at least one other person needs to confirm that what you have as an observation in terms of a photo or sound is that specific creature. Oftentimes, especially for things like mammals and birds, you will have many people confirming the accuracy or inaccuracy of an observation. It's also important to consider the different AI that is built into the system that will also help ensure that you are identifying species properly. So there has been some efforts to learn from the City Nature Challenge in terms of scientific research. There have been several papers that have been published. While the City Nature Challenge is pretty new, 2016, and there hasn't been as much long-term data about the challenge and its benefits to community and science work, there has been some promising signs. So we see that with the iNaturalist application that every period during Earth Month and the City Nature Challenge, there is a huge spike. You'll see that with the fluctuations. And you'll also see that every year, the number of overall users increases. So while after the City Nature Challenge, actual usage does decline, the number of people participating every year is continuing to increase. So oftentimes after the events, many people continue using iNaturalist, either on a one-time episodic basis or on a frequent basis. iNaturalist reached last year 5 million monthly observations and 150 million total observations for the first time. And those only continue to grow. And those observations are used by researchers to identify species range maps, monitor population sizes and their health, observe different behaviors, so say like migration, time of activity, time of bloom, among other things. And the City of Nature Challenge event, as well as similar events, help to increase the amount of data available to scientists. It's also important for increasing community engagement. Community engagement is incredibly critical, especially in this period of time for conservation, because if we do not engage the communities we're working in, we're not going to have the proper support in order to achieve necessary conservation action. These large events are able to engage a huge number of people globally in identifying different species and getting into nature, many of whom would never participate in an activity like this in their normal time. Many of these people will oftentimes become more conscious after the events about the nature around them, which is the goal. And it also builds interest and understanding of the different conservation work that is being done in different communities. So how does one engage? So you can go your own way and lead, just go out into the field during that observation period of April 26th through 29th by yourself. You can do it from your home. You can do it from other parts of your community. The different regions have specific zones that have been blocked off as areas counting towards the City Nature Challenge. However, if you wander out of those areas, those observations are still used by the iNaturalist community. It's just they won't count towards the City Nature Challenge for your region. So if you really want to support your local community and getting those numbers, make sure you're considering the regions that have been blocked off. But otherwise, you can kind of go on your own. Maybe you want to become a organizer, kind of like how I'm organizing the City Nature Challenge for Portland, Vancouver Metro. Every year, they collect individuals who are interested in organizing for their regions. And there are many regions in the state of Oregon that are not being currently organized. So maybe if you're not based out of Salem, You can organize your community if it is not already engaged. Organization does not have to be super complex. You could even have like a small bio blitz or be the only one leading it. There's just a few parameters set up by the staff of Cal Academy of the Sciences in the Los Angeles County Museum of Natural History that you need to follow as guidelines. You can also participate in public events. So right here is a QR code that links to events happening in the Salem metro area. There is a variety of public events that are being hosted by the city of Salem and Marion Soil and Water Conservation District. There's also events throughout the state in Portland, Vancouver Metro with the Nature Conservancy and other organizations. The city of Bend with Think Wild, and down in Lane County with Mackenzie River Trust, the Nature Conservancy, Mount Pisgah Arboretum, being a few of the organizations. You can do those identifications at home if you're really feeling like it. And then you can gather others. So some of the events that Salem is doing include an owl prowl, insect spotlighting, riparian plant and bird walk, and native and invasive plant identification. So iNaturalist. I told you about this app, this website. It's relatively easy. So the first thing you're going to want to do is go to the Apple Play Store the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, or go to their website, iNaturalist.org, download the app and sign in and create an account. It's pretty direct forward for the process of signing in. You just basically put your email in, create a password, and that account can be also shared. So say maybe you work with a small organization or maybe you want a family account, that is totally doable. And then you make observations using a photo or sound. An observation records an encounter with an individual organism at a particular time and location and gives information on history to iNaturalist. So you can mark what the species is, whether it's male or female, other information that you happen to know. The critical information, though, is species, date, and location. There is artificial intelligence or AI that is built. Oh, sorry. I should also mention this. Observations include not only the living creature, but also count feathers, fur, fecal matter, nests, and footprints, and also animals that are no longer living. If you find a carcass, that is also something that you can post to iNaturalist, and it counts towards the challenge, or just support scientists in understanding the animals, plants, and fungi that are in your neighborhoods. The process for actually making the observation, you're going to do that within the app and add the evidence. So AI is also built into the app, and when you're putting in an observation, it will give you suggestions and helpful hints for what that specific species happens to be. You can also, after you submit, you can also provide feedback for others who are making identifications as well. So this image is of a snowy egret, and say that someone input it as a great egret. You could go into their observation, click on it, and put a suggest, and then suggest snowy egret, and then put in information of this is a snowy egret because of its black bill. Whereas if you have a great egret, it's going to have a yellow bill. And that's one of a few identifying characteristics, but an easy one. So some helpful tips and tricks that I can share with you all. So it's important to use the AI that is part of the system. It can give you really helpful hints of what you're seeing. But just because you get some really helpful hints and it might look like the species that you've identified, that doesn't necessarily mean it is. There are a lot of species that look very similar to one another. And it's important to not only use the AI, but use the skills that you already have, as well as use the support of other people in your community and in the iNaturalist application to help with those identifications. That's why it's not only the AI and yourself that makes the identification research grade, it requires other people looking at it. It's also important to focus on your image. So blurry images are not ideal. You also want to make sure that you're taking pictures of individual species. A meadow of wildflowers can be really pretty, but that can be really hard for people to confirm as research grade because they're not 100% sure usually what is the species that you're trying to highlight in that photo. Oftentimes, say you have a situation where you see a beautiful wildflower field, you're going to want to focus on one wildflower in that space. The benefit of that is you can actually create multiple different observations for that same field. So say you see a rosy pectritis, you can take one photo of that, and then you can take another photo of a camas lily that happens to be right next to it. And that would be two different observations rather than just one giant. So it's also the option and opportunity to use more photos for your observation. For certain things, especially plants, it's really hard to identify from just one single photo. Oftentimes you need images of the fruit, the flowers, the leaf, the bark. Having more images can be helpful, especially if some of the images you have are blurry, but you still want to make an identification of a species. Consider different angles of those images. Oftentimes, full shot photos are not necessarily going to provide the level of detail needed to make an observation. It's also important to consider the amount of personal space you're giving to these organisms. So for something like this Pacific slide band, you can get a little bit more up close and personal. Smaller animals are harder to observe on your phone. In fact, if you are wanting to observe things like ants and aphids, you can get little clip-ons for your phone that have like a macro lens to be able to observe a little bit more close. But we want to consider giving personal space, especially when we're talking about animals, because of the fact that we want to make sure that we are not negatively impacting their life history and their what they're doing and impacting their behavior in a negative way. So happen to see a deer or coyote or other species, that's great. We want to see it in the iNaturalist, but we want to make sure you're giving it adequate space. A good photo is not more important than the animal's welfare. And then also, obviously, for certain animals, you don't want to get too close to them because of the risk that they possibly could pose to you. You can also modify the program a little bit. As I mentioned, using iNaturalist is something that is something for people who are 13 and older. If you know people who are under 13, though, they can use Seek. You can also modify, so say you're having a school group that wants to participate in the City Nature Challenge, you can create one account for that classroom and then have that teacher or another individual upload all the photos taken by all the students, and then together they can work on identifications. So multiple people can be working on one account. That is a possibility. Another thing to consider is audio. So especially if you're looking at things like birds or certain amphibians like frogs, recording sound of their calls might be more accurate and more accessible than taking photos. Oftentimes, birds don't necessarily want to be seen by us, but they produce calls that can be easily recorded on our phones. Those can be uploaded to iNaturalist, or those can be added with a photo identification into iNaturalist. So maybe you have a kind of blurry photo, but you also have a call, and it provides more opportunity for an accurate identification. So some helpful information. This year, the Sydney Nature Challenge. The Sydney Nature Challenge is always the last weekend in April. And it's a 4-day weekend for this. So it starts on Friday, April 26th and goes to April 29th. For each time zone, it starts at 12 a.m. on the Friday and ends at 11:59 on the Monday. So it's going to be basically the same time frame no matter where you're at in the world. After that period, those are when the observations are made, but there is an additional identification and uploading period where people are able to upload images to the app that they took over that weekend. There's also opportunities for people to go in and confirm identifications. And that runs from that Tuesday, April 30th until May 5th. And then the results are going to be announced on May 6th as to what places are the top ranked. I know Portland, Vancouver Metro was within the top 100 last year. I'm hoping that we can still accomplish that. I am foreseeing that Salem, Portland will have, and Lane County will probably all have high numbers, and Bend too. And it's more important that we're getting people unengaged. So super exciting. If you want to find out more about any of the events that are happening, I would suggest checking out nature.org/city nature challenge. I'll also drop that in the chat. We have links on that portion of the website to Think Wild's website for Bend. We have one event going on in Lane County that's up there, and then we're going to have links to other stuff that is being done in Lane County in the near future. Portland, Vancouver Metro stuff that we are putting on is on that part of the website, and there's a link to the City of Salem page. I want to offer some special thanks. First off to my colleague, Yassine Ganab, who helped with putting together the presentation. Thank you so much for your support in adding some of the design elements and writing up the One Science page. I also want to thank the partners that I've been working with, including the wonderful partners that have invited me to talk on this First Friday presentation, the City of Salem and Marion Soil and Water Conservation District. I want to thank my supervisor, as well as all Molly Doherty, as well as all these other organizations and many more that are participating in the City Nature Challenge or have helped us get to this point with the City Nature Challenge. And thank you so much for being part of my presentation and also looking at a lot of these cool photos, many of which I've taken, including of this American mink, which was one of the coolest things I've ever seen in my life.
Max, I've been impressed by the photos throughout your presentation.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today and talking to us about this topic. I know I definitely learned quite a bit, and I'm excited to go use that app more and maybe even get my kid out and actually observing nature a little bit more than just playing in it. So thank you for your talk today.